The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon. My name is Tracy Nyer, and I'm with the Virginia SBDC. I'll be your facilitator for today's webinar. For those of you who are not familiar, the Virginia SBDC is the largest and most effective provider of customized counseling and education for small businesses in Virginia. Most of our services are offered locally in 27 locations throughout the Commonwealth. Today's webinar is part of our educational offerings series, Google and Beyond, Managing and Marketing on the Web. Today's topic is all about domains. All of our Google and Beyond webinars are presented by Ray Sidney-Smith, a web and mobile strategist, author of Solo Mo Success, Social Media, Local, and Web Small Business Marketing Strategy Explained, and president of W3 Consulting. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type those questions into the question window, and Ray will do his best to answer them. Without further ado, here's Ray Sidney-Smith.
Thank you, Tracy, and thank you to the Virginia SBDC for having me here on the Google and Beyond Marketing and Managing on the Web series. As Tracy said, today's topic is all about domains, really helping you to choose the right website domain for your business. And as Tracy said, if you have any questions, now is the time to ask them. Ignore the slide there, but ask questions. My contact information will be on the final slide, so if you have any questions, you can feel free to go ahead and email me after the webinar. You can go ahead and follow at W3 Consulting, and if you hashtag it beyond Google, I'll know what it's about, and you'll be able to ask me questions there. I'm pretty much always on Twitter. I don't know when I'm not on Twitter. I guess when I'm sleeping. But feel free to ask me questions on Twitter. I'm always happy to answer them there. But if you are not a Twitter person, feel free to go ahead and email me your questions. Follow at Virginia SBDC for other programs and other information that they're putting out about small business resources here in the Commonwealth. So go ahead and follow at Virginia SBDC for more information. So with those housekeeping items out of the way, let's talk a little bit about our agenda for today. Today, what I'd like to do is to just cover a brief history of domains so that you have an understanding of what a domain actually is, and then we'll cover why it's important for your business, and that will get into really the rules for being able to establish a good domain, a proper domain for your business. So we'll talk about some of the rules, that is the laws that govern domains. We'll then talk about some of the rules that I've created for domains, and then the guidelines for being able to choose a good domain. And so often there are bad domains chosen, and to be quite honest, I'm gonna lambast my own company's domain quite a bit during this hour, just going to show you that sometimes you have to make tough choices, and that means choosing sometimes a bad domain, but it goes ahead and works out anyway. So it's important to follow these guidelines, but don't get too hung up on it such that you can't make a good decision and finally make a decision about choosing a domain. So don't get too hung up on this, but let's get into it now with a brief history of domains. And so a lot of people don't realize this, but the internet is approximately only 30 years old. And that means that the internet is fairly young, and the internet is separated from, in essence, the World Wide Web. So if you can think about it from this perspective, the internet is the backbone that transits data across the world digitally. The World Wide Web itself is the data that is being transited. So the World Wide Web is all of the various data that's held on many servers around the world and transmits data from one place to another. So that data is transited from one place to another through the internet. Okay, so the World Wide Web is very different. And as many of you may not know, W3 Consulting, my company, is named after the World Wide Web, W3, right? It's supposed to be W to the power of 3. And it's actually a play on the W3 Consortium, the World Wide Web Consortium, the standards body that promulgates all of the rules for how the World Wide Web should be transited over the internet. Okay, so that comes to the domain. The first domain was registered in 1985, and so the idea of a domain is relatively new. We're talking, less than 40 years old, and we are in this place where we have domains that in 1985, that is, when the first domains were created, they were actually free. There was a long, fairly lengthy application process that was then subsequently approved for you to be able to have your domain. And actually, the first domain was a website called Symbolics. Symbolics.com, and that domain actually still exists. It's kind of a museum, if maybe not a mausoleum of of a website, and you can go check it out. You can go to Symbolics, SYMBOLIX.com, and you will see there the website and kind of a hearkening back to the old days of the World Wide Web. So again, we go from 1985, where we have the free domain construct, and then we fast forward to just a few years later, when, I'm sorry, so we fast forward to the end of 1985, and literally there were only 6 domains then registered, among them being example.com, which the IANA, one of the other domain standard bodies, they reserved this domain for being able to show. And I'm actually going to show you example.com throughout our conversation today. So we have up until end of 1985, I think it's about June to about the end of 1985, we had 6 registered domains. Today, we have approximately 330 million domains registered now. So there's clearly been an explosion over the last 30 odd years. And what that has done is it has restricted options. It has restricted the number of domains that have been available to us. So as we have our conversation today about domains, really recognize the fact that while there is ample uniqueness available, there's ample variations available, we are in a place where we once had quite a lot of variety, and that variety has been limiting over the years because of the industry that cropped up from going from a free system to then a fee system back in 1995. So in 95, just 10 years after the first domain was registered, domains were now submitted for a fee. Basically, ICANN, which is another one of those crediting bodies, they basically said, this costs money for us to be able to manage all of this, and we have to limit the number of people who are just willy-nilly registering domains without us being able to control it more. And so they decided to start charging a fee for any number of the reasons I just said, plus a few others. So then it became a fee-based system, and that led to, in 2013, us staving off a problem that is still continuing to happen, but we basically ran out of all of the 4-letter domains that existed on the planet. So if you can think about that, and by 4-letter domains, it's actually second-level domains, and I'll explain that shortly. But the idea here is that any of those 4-letter domains are now registered and taken by some entity. So as you can see, we've gone from having a plethora of domains available just under the few top-level domains, and again, I'll talk about this in a little bit, to now whittling our way down to having less and less options in terms of short domains. So people are making longer and longer domains today because of that. So I just wanted to give a little bit of the history of how the domains went from being free and widely available in terms of options, that now today, when you start a business or your business decides to then get on the web, that the available domains are lessening as time goes on because of the fact that more people are producing websites, registering domains, and using those for their businesses. So this really does require some terminology to be explained. So I'm gonna try and give you the technical terms for these things and then explain to you what they're all about. But going back to that www.example.com, the reserved domain that the IANA has reserved for showing you what a website should do in its most basic sense, let's look at what www.example.com is really comprised of. And so the first part is that we can see the whole domain by looking at www.example.com, right? In this example, the whole domain that we generally talk about is the www.example.com. But there are actually 3 unique parts to the domain. The first part is the .com. So if we look at .com, .com is actually what we call a top-level domain. The top-level domain means that when the internet looks at the system, it is actually looking for the top-level commercial website first before it looks for anything else. So it actually reads your domain in a right to left perspective, right? So it actually reads it in the opposite way than we read the domain. So it looks for the .com first, and then it looks for the second level domain, and that's the example part. So in www.example.com, example is what we call the second level domain. And that's really the unique part. And so if we combine example and com for example.com, that's really the most important part about choosing a right domain for your business. We then get to the www, and that's the host. And all that means is that there's a server that is hosting your data, and that's where the data is that lives for that particular domain. So we really don't care about the www today because, to be quite honest, unless you have subdomains or a variety of different other things, www is expected, it's understood by most web browsers. So if you typed in example.com into your web browser, it would naturally understand whether or not, based on the server that was rendering your data, whether there was a www or not. Okay, so whether you typed in example.com or www.example.com, it will still resolve to wherever the host is because the host knows and it will redirect them. Okay, so we have top level domain, second level domain, and I will be using the terms TLD and SLD a little bit throughout our conversation so you understand that com is TLD, example is SLD. Next up is understanding the registrar. So the registrar is the person who handles your domains. And so at W3 Consulting, under our web services, we're a domain registrar. And so we handle domains for many small businesses. And so we are the ones you would come to register a domain for your business, right? So that's one thing that you have out there in the world. And if you're out there looking for a domain, you're going to find a registrar, whether, whatever registrar you decide to choose, and you would register your domain with them, okay? Then you have a host provider. Now, a host provider, they're the people who handle your hosting for your website. Now, the difference between the two is that your domain are the three parts. It's like your address on the internet, right? Whereas the files that are rendered are the pages and the images and or videos and other kinds of files that are there on cloud servers. So what's a cloud server? A cloud server is actually a file storage system that is connected to the internet that then serves those files that are not situate within your office. Okay, so a cloud server is just basically a series of servers that serve out files to people when they request them. They happen not to be located in your own physical office space. They happen to be in some other company's office space, a host provider's, data center, and they are serving those files out when they're requested. And since it's the internet, it's a public repository, and the World Wide Web, that is a public repository. So when someone goes ahead and requests that information, anyone can access that data. Now, there's some, parts of the data that are not publicly available, but generally the idea of the World Wide Web is that the content you want to render should be available to everybody, and that's the whole concept of a cloud server. Okay, then we get to TLDs, and we have 4 different types of TLDs, 3 of which are on your screen right now. So the first one are the original top-level domains, and we'll talk about those shortly. And so we have original top-level domains, and there are 7 of those. Then we have what we call GTLDs, generic top-level domains. We then have country code top-level domains. We'll talk about those. And then GeoTLDs, which are just a little bit different than country code TLDs. And again, I'll show you what the difference is right now. So let's hop out over to Wikipedia. And what I'm going to do is take you over to the Wikipedia's list of top-level domains. And so here on the list of internet top-level domains, you can just search this on Wikipedia. You can see here we have original top-level domains. And if we look here, the 7 that I mentioned earlier are .com, which is for a commercial entity, and anyone can register a .com through many different domain registrars. And you don't need to do anything. It's called an open TLD, because any person or entity can go ahead and register one. With register one, there's no reason for you to have to do any kind of work to get one. Then you have .org. .org is generally a for a nonprofit organization, or primarily for some kind of social program, social group, not necessarily for a business. But you will see businesses that do them. You'll see people who use their, it'll be johndoe.org, and people will take them for their own personal name. But there's now a .name, so that's not really necessary. But anyway, .org is for organization, and you have that there. .net has a peculiar background in the sense that it's .net. Today, people use it for businesses, and so it's very common to see a business with the .net. It originally was actually for telecommunications networks, so it was for networked computers. It was meant for networks, hence why it's a .net. But people took it since it was one of the original top-level domains, they took it for commercial enterprise, and so .net is now commonly used for business ones. You have then a series of other top-level domains, and these are really not accessible to you unless you happen to be a secondary higher education institute or military or government or that kind of thing. So you have .int, which are for international associations. Again, you would have to be a program that's based on one of these international treaties, and you then can apply for it, and so on and so forth. Then .edu, like I said, educational institutions. .gov if you're a government entity, then you can apply for one, and .mil if you are part of the US military. So those are the 7, but of course, .com, .org, .net are the primaries for you in that world. Okay, then we hop down to the country code TLDs. And the country code TLDs are actually really useful in the sense that if your business happens to have the country code built into it as a part of its name. So for example, if you were Time Magazine, you could scroll down to the M's, and you can see here that there is an ME, which is Montenegro, which happened to be in the news recently. And so Time Magazine, what they did was they got the domain ti.me, right? And it spells time. So there goes an example where you can actually use a country code top-level domain. These typically 2-letter, but in the case of like the UK, it's 6 digits or whatever, because it's got 2 dots, right? It's .co.uk and so on and so forth. Just running over to it now, but I'm not seeing it. But either way, the point is that you have the ability to then have a word like your business name or brand name, then use the TLD as a component to spell out your business name or brand or product or whatever. So you can actually save on characters by using these things. So if your real estate team, right, was Bob's real estate team, you could have Bob's real estate te.am, which is the country code for Armenia. Now, this is not its intended purpose. So remember that there could be some unintended consequences of this. For example, several years ago, Bitly, the short URL, the URL shortener company, they got a little bit of flack because their shortener is bit.ly. Well, if you go ahead and just jump down to that, you can see that is the country code for Libya, okay? And since Libya had a little bit of, some humanitarian crisis, as well as the leader of Libya, that whole conflict overseas caused a little bit of a brand issue for Bitly. They seem to have survived it, and it's fine, but just know that you should be very aware that can be problematic. Also, like look at Liechtenstein. They have to make a note here that it's unofficially used by a bunch of businesses in Long Island, New York, even though it's a different country. So you can also have some of these weird misunderstandings, and your business domain is also, when you use a country code top-level domain, TLD, you have to recognize that Google, for local businesses, is looking sometimes at those, not sometimes, they're always looking at those top level domains. So you have to make sure that Google knows that if you use .es, which is the country code for Spain, that you're not actually in Spain, right? So you have to set your metadata on your website to make sure that Google knows that even though you have a .es, that you're still situate in Virginia and your town and your address, so that you don't get a misunderstanding about your locale, okay? So you can use them, but you just have to make sure that your web developer, or if you're doing it yourself, you know how to make sure Google knows you are where you are, because that .es is going to make it think, oh, you're in Spain, and so therefore you shouldn't drive any traffic from people who are doing searches for you here in the US, okay? All right, that brings us to the final TLDs that I wanted to show, which were the internationalized geographic top-level domains, which are the GTLDs. Now, these are a variety of them, but I'm just going to show you the ones here in North America. There are actually only 5 of them so far, but I'm sure that will expand over time. And as you can see, we have Boston, Miami, NYC for New York City. We have Quebec, and then we have Vegas. Okay, and so what's happening is jurisdictions, cities around the country are lobbying ICANN and the various other internet bodies to create GTLDs for their areas. So you might someday have a .Richmond, or other cities that are major, like a .DC, and those will then become more popular. When that happens, then your business is even more hyper localized by virtue of that. So you can imagine that if you were in New York City and you had a .NYC, you're going to have a fairly strong boost in local search, because Google knows exactly where you are and how to drive traffic to that locale, that domain. Okay, so we have some real cool things that are happening. This is in the years time frame, not in the next months. So just keep an eye out on these kinds of campaigns. And New York City did a very big campaign push to launch and bring .nyc to bear. So know that those things are happening, and it's fairly interesting to watch these very hyper local GTLDs get established. Now, again, there are ones all over the world, and so as you look at your own business, if you happen to be international, if you happen to have locations overseas and in different cities, you may think about some of these others that do exist. You have ones throughout each of the continents. Okay, so those are the top level domains, and I just wanted to show you them and cover them because they are important for you to kind of understand. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to ping Tracy, and I will be happy to answer those as we make our way along. So next terminology item is the SSL certificate. Now, this has gotten some news recently because as of July, Google is actually putting warnings on websites that collect data that do not have the SSL certificate. And so, or if you have an expired certificate, even worse. So here's what the SSL certificate is. What it does is it secures, it stands for Secure Socket Layer, and it uses a type of technology that secures your connection between looking at a link, say on Google, and when the person goes to that link, the data that is transited between your website's hosting provider, that is your cloud server, your hosting provider's cloud server, and the person's browser. In effect, what it's doing is it's protecting someone from intervening and injecting malware or other kinds of bad acting code into the connection between your website host and the user. Now, that doesn't mean that if your website isn't infected with malware and it renders it to the person who's visiting your website, they're still not going to they're not going to get infected. They will, but the SSL certificate stops the intervention of bad actors from being able to compromise the connection between your website host and you. And so it's actually very important to Google, because if Google knows that you're giving a clean, secure experience connection to your web host, between your web host and the visitor, then Google has to worry less about the user then sort of blaming Google for sending them to your website when they do a Google search, right? If I'm looking for your service or product and I find your product or service and then I get infected from clicking on a link on Google, I kind of blame Google for it, and it's not Google's fault. So Google basically is saying, okay, well, if they're gonna place fault on us, then we're gonna require you to have an SSL certificate. So in essence, it's pretty much a requirement now going forward from July 2018 forward. And so you should certainly have an SSL certificate installed on your website. Okay. And that means liaising between your domain registrar and your hosting provider, because there is a little bit of technical stuff that needs to be understood about HTTP and HTTPS and how to direct things between those two parties. Okay, so terminology understood. All right. Next up, why do you need a domain? And I get this question quite often when people are really not understanding that if you don't have a domain, no one knows you're in business, right? It delegitimizes you on the internet and on the World Wide Web. In essence, without a domain, how are people supposed to be able to find you? Googling your business name might find social profiles, it might find other kinds of data about your business, but ultimately your domain is what should be presented because it's the place that you control. And so then that brings up people who say, oh, well, I have a blog, it's mybusinessblog.blogspot.com, which is the blogger service run by Google. Or they have a WordPress.com site, so they have mybusiness.wordpress.com. And in reality, you don't control that domain. Okay, you have a perception that you control it, but you really don't, and that comes down to control over the second level domain. And this is where it's really important for us to go back to that terminology. Remember when we talked about COM, then is the top level domain, and which is the .com, .net, or whatever other top level domain you choose. Then we get down to the second level domain. Well, that SLD, if you look at it here, that's Blogspot, right? So who controls Blogspot? Well, Blogger does. And who owns Blogger? Google. So if Google decides that they don't like what you're doing on your website, they can shut down your website. That's the same thing with WordPress.com or any other of those hosting providers that give you, in essence, a subdomain, a host, right? mybusinessblog.com here is the host. They are hosting your data and they're giving you a URL to go to, but in essence, you don't control that second level domain. And it's really important for your business that you control the second level domain. Okay. And then, of course, if you want to have a business website, say you want to install a WordPress website, Wix or Squarespace or Shopify, you need a domain. You need a domain to be able to direct people to. It helps you control and represent your brand legitimately.
Ray,
again, yes.
Can you give an example again of the registrar and a host provider? So an example of a registrar and an example of a host provider.
Sure.
To differentiate between the two.
Yeah, so you can register many domains just for purposes of holding those domains, and I'm going to talk about that actually on the next slide. So you can have a domain provider, say they're kind of the same, sometimes the same people, but they're not. So I'm trying to think of a hosting provider who's not a domain registrar and a domain registrar that's not, but there are those people out there. In essence, think of it as being two different things you need to manage. And so, for example, okay, let's go for example. You come to me and you say, I want to have a WordPress.com website, okay? And so you go to GoDaddy and you register a domain, mybusiness.com, okay? And so now GoDaddy is your domain registrar. Now you go to WordPress.com and you sign up for a business level hosting account, and now WordPress.com is your host provider. All right. Now, WordPress.com and GoDaddy need to now work together to send your domain to your website, to the content on your website. Okay, so that's the difference, is that one completely manages where to direct your traffic when someone goes to your domain, and the other is managing the files that are sitting under your control. I hope that helps clarify let Tracy know if it doesn't, and I'll be happy to continue to answer that, because I know it can be confusing, but they are two different entities, and most of them are the same. For example, like I said, web services here at W3 Consulting, we do both, but in essence, those are two different products, two different parties. So my actions as a domain registrar are very different than my actions as a web host for you. It's very, very different. Okay. So then we get to brand protection, and in essence, there are people out there who will do cyber squatting. They will go out there and register many, many domains in order to be able to hit the lottery when you come along and you want to start a business and basically want that domain. So it's better that you take a domain now to protect yourself than to have to go after somebody who is cyber squatting. If you want to get a business email address, you're going to need a domain. You just can't, please do not use at AOL, at Yahoo, or at Gmail accounts for your business. It does not represent you well. Okay, you can use that when you first get started, if you need to register accounts and do some stuff there. But in general, you're not going to want a my business name at gmail.com account as the email address you put on a website for yourself, because people will judge you. People will look down on you, and who cares about judgment or any of those other things? People will not buy from you. If you want to make money, you need to do the things that are going to represent your business well enough. And we know from the data that people who see Gmail accounts don't have as much feelings of trust and trustworthiness in that company to want to then buy from them. So you have to have your name at yourbusinessname.com or something similar to that, so that you can have that legitimacy. And then finally, and I think one of the most important things, is that Google uses your domain to verify you through Google My Business. So when a business shows up and appears on Google Maps, it's either verified or not verified by virtue of you going to your website and telling Google, here goes my business domain name, and I control it, and therefore I exist. And so Google then says, oh, good, you're verified, and I can send you people. I can trust to send you more people by virtue of the fact that you've registered, you've gone through this process of verifying that you are the business that people are looking for. Okay, so this is very, very important for you to be able to get a good amount of local search traffic, so that you show up in the local pack, which is the 3 businesses, usually 3 to 6 businesses that show up when someone does a local search for a local service provider or a local retail store. So you really want to make sure you have a domain for those purposes. So I hope that gives you at least some guardrails in terms of why you need a domain, or potentially several domains for your business. Okay, now we're going to talk about some of the rules. As I said at the top of the webinar, I'm going to cover a couple of federal laws that govern domains, and then we're going to talk about the LDH rule and my revised LDH rules, and then we will talk about guidelines. So we're going to cover 3 kind of corridors of rules, so that you can understand what some of the boundaries are for you in the process of this. So first up comes the Anti-Cyber Squatting Consumer Protections Act of 1999. And what this in essence said was that you can't cyber squat on existing intellectual property that exists. So in essence, what was happening was that there were people going out there and taking domains like target.org, target.co, and so on and so forth, and then Target or Walmart or Microsoft or Yahoo, they got upset, and so they probably lobbied Congress to tell these cyber squatters to stop squatting on their trademarks. Now, this doesn't particularly protect new businesses. So unfortunately, if your trademark doesn't and hasn't already been put out in the public space, then someone who goes ahead and registers a domain in the hopes that at some point somebody will want it, that's not cyber squatting. So it protects primarily big business here. This Anti-Cyber Squatting Consumer Protections Act really should be Anti-Cyber Squatting Big Business Protections Act, but it protects big businesses and their trademarks, but it doesn't particularly protect a lot of the small businesses that then start up and now find that their domain of choice has already been taken. And so then you need to go out there and find either a new one or pay the person who has taken this domain without you knowing. The next up is the Truth in Domains Act. This was put into place in 2003, and in essence, it just basically says don't pretend to be anything else if you are pornography. And so what was happening was people were going out there and putting in misleading domains, and then people would be directed to pornographic material, and Congress just basically said, you can't do that. Okay. In general, this has been expanded. These laws have been expanded or contracted in different ways or been interpreted in different ways. But primarily, one landmark Supreme Court case allows people to create domains that are protected under the First Amendment. So you can have a MicrosoftSucks.com under the Taubman lawsuit that went to the Supreme Court. So in essence, you can express your free speech by having domains that do include someone's trademark if you are making a statement. Right? You're making some kind of speech, and so therefore the Anti-Cybersquatting Consumer Protections Act was limited in that sense, because you could have, in this case, Taubman, the mall, was sued in order to stop this person from having TaubmanSucks.com, and the defendant was eventually won the case, and so now free speech is protected in that capacity. And on the flip side, the TID or TIDA Act is now kind of understood that people shouldn't create domains that are going to misrepresent wherever people are being sent. So if you say that you are a retail suit business, you should not be sending people to a retail food market, right? It just doesn't make any sense, and it's gonna anger people, and therefore not be useful to you or others. And they may have legal recourse, so it's not worth you misrepresenting yourself on the web. Okay, this comes to what I call the revised LDH rules. And in essence, what it does is it puts together the LDH rule, which I'll explain in a moment, and then gives my provisions to help garner a better idea about what you should and shouldn't do as you're choosing both your top-level domain and your second-level domain. So first and foremost, keep your second-level domain, your SLD, between 4 and 20 characters. So we're not talking about your .com, .net, .consulting, or whatever other top-level domain you're choosing, but the words that show up between the two dots should stay between 4 and 20 characters. Okay, there's just been a lot of analysis over time of the lengths of URLs and the lengths of domains. And 4 and 20 characters, it's like 4 and 20 blackbirds baked into a pie, right? You want to really keep your domain, second-level domain, as short as possible. So keep it between 4 and 20 characters. Next up, you need at least one alphabetic character, and this will be wrapped up into my next two rules. But the reality is that that's a requirement by the Internet authorities, and so you have to have at least one alphabetical character, that is A, B, C through Z. You can have, as part of the LDH rule, LDH actually stands for letters, digits, and hyphen. And so you can actually have letters, again, A through Z, numbers 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, right? And or a hyphen or multiple hyphens in your domain name, okay? And so that you know, a second-level domain can actually be up to 63 characters. So again, between the two dots, between www and .com, you can have 63 characters. But again, keep it between 4 and 20, and keep it to pretty much just letters. I know it's really enticing sometimes to think about putting and getting a domain that just has hyphens in it, so that you can overcome the fact that somebody else has the domain that doesn't have the hyphens in it, or adding a number, so the same exact domain but just putting one.com, after it, is very enticing, but it's poor practice. It doesn't look good, and it's going to create more confusion than it will clarity for people trying to find you. So while you can have letters, numbers, and hyphens, feel free to avoid numbers and hyphens. So we want only letters. This is where I get to kind of make fun of ourselves at W3 Consulting, because we were really wedded to W3, the brand. And so when we decided to launch our website, we chose w3cinc.com, and it has a number in it. So we had to make the trade-off, the call that we were going to put this number in there, full well knowing that it somewhat breaks Ray's revised LDH rule, right? so understand that even when you're looking at some of these things, you can still you're still going to have to bend the rules sometimes in order to make things work. You should also avoid abbreviations. This comes down to just a search engine factor, which is that if you have a domain and you are sdh.com, well, what is sdh.com? But you say, well, it stands for Smith Davis and Houston .com. Smith Houston Davis and Houston consulting, but the reality is that who knows that? Only you do. So abbreviations, while are cute and helpful for other reasons, they should not be your primary domain. So pretty much avoid abbreviations for that reason. Also abbreviations of words, like taking out the vowels in a word or things of that nature. There are some businesses that can do it. Generally for you, you don't want to do that. Also know that in general, the case doesn't matter in a domain name. So if you wrote things in all caps, in all lower caps, in mixed caps, it doesn't matter. So I know that some people have had a misunderstanding about this, but your domain name is not case sensitive. URLs and URIs, so all URLs are URIs, for those who have that question, but not all URIs are URLs, but all URIs can be case sensitive, but domain names themselves are not. Okay, so all right, so let's move along here to now guidelines for being able to choose a good name. So now that we have the rules in place, and we'll reflect back on those rules, as we make our way through, we know what we need to do now, which is to now choose a good domain for our business. One is that we want to be concise but not incoherent. So, for example, if we had the mygreatbusiness.com, and you wanted to take that as a domain, is that appropriate from the perspective that, yes, it's concise, but it's kind of incoherent. It has no relationship to an industry or a brand or anything like that. So you need to then figure out, well, what's the adjective, what's the modifier that's going to tell me about my great business, my great retail business? That still sounds pretty generic to me. My great fashion business, well, maybe if you do a wide variety of things in just the fashion industry, but you could then say my great Northern Virginia fashion shop. Now it's coherent, but it's also not concise. So we have to balance out here the availability of domains with also the fact that we want to keep it short enough, but we also want it to be explanatory in what we're offering people from the first time they visit our site. So you want it to be brand focused, right? In this case, I wanted to say smithconsulting.com or smith.consulting, since .consulting is now a GTLD available to me. So I can say smith.consulting. Okay, great. If Smith Consulting is the brand, or we can use a tagline, right, and use that as a domain. So that's where exact match domains are really helpful. So an exact match domain is actually the words that are typed into a Google search that people would then find your business through. So if you did, I always use the example of eco-friendly carpet cleaning, home carpet cleaning. Let's stick to residential. So eco-friendly home carpet cleaning. If ecofriendlyhomecarpetcleaning.com was available, and you took that, that would be an exact match domain, because if someone was looking for eco-friendly home carpet cleaning and they typed that into Google, presumably, if your business was local to them, it would show up first in the Google search results page. So exact match domains are really powerful, but don't expect them to be the end all be all for you. They are very useful if you can find them, but they are lucrative. So people take them fairly quickly, and then they become not concise. They become really long. I use the rule of spell and speak. So, for example, picking on our own domain, I have to constantly clarify for people that there's a numeral, the numeral 3, the number 3 that is, in our domain. So w the number 3 cinc.com, right? That by itself allows me to spell and speak it not as well as I could if it didn't have a number. So in essence, you want to be able to spell and speak a domain, right? So for example, example.com, it's pretty easy for me to say example.com, example.com, and people will not have too much confusion over how to find that domain, how to write it down when you say it in a workshop or a seminar, if someone has you come up and introduce yourself in a crowd. You have the ability to say your domain, and it should be readily available to people to be able to understand how it would be spelled, and then to be able to spell it out loud if you need to, and someone should be able to take it down without too many errors. It should work across your entire business. And this is really important because many businesses come to me and they say, okay, we want to brand our business and we want to come up with a name and choose a domain. And then 6 months, 9 months down the road, they pivot. They decide to choose a different industry. They just decide to expand their product line, and the business name that they've chosen doesn't fit that category. And so I'm always asking people, well, is this really going to matter to you now and or down the road? Is this something that's going to really help encompass it? And yes, you can change your domain name in a couple of years if your business changes dramatically and you really need to do that. But it's just better if you don't have to make the change because your business name encompasses all of the things that you need to. Again, you need to balance this out between being concise and coherent while also being broad enough to cover all of the various product services that you might have someday. And that also means that you may just have multiple domains. You might decide that you launch a whole new website for a different product line because it doesn't fit within your primary domain. Yes, people will say to me, okay, then Ray, which top-level domain should I choose? And a lot of experts out there will say you should never choose a top-level domain other than .com, .net, or .org, respectively. And from my perspective, I don't think that's true. Yes, if you can get the .com, snag it. If you've gone through the process that I'm about to walk you through, and you can get the .com, certainly. But getting any other TLD is going to be just fine. Okay, so don't worry so much about this because I have lots of top-level domains that are GTLDs, .consulting, .services, .nyc, the other dots. And no one has any confusion over whether it's a website or not. People generally don't have a problem with it. Most often than not, they're links based on the name of the thing they're trying to go to. And if you need to clarify, just put https:// in front of the domain, or www. in front of the domain, and everybody pretty much gets it that it's a domain. So I would not worry so much about the idea that it's going to be somehow confusing. If you see Ray at xyz dot consulting, you're going to know that's an email address. It's going to look a little funny to you, but you're going to know it's an email address, and most people will. So don't worry about that. All right, so here goes my process for being able to choose a domain name. First, you brainstorm a list of your brand's different keywords. So that's your name, your tagline, and product names. I'll give you an example. For W3 Consulting, our tagline is helping small business on the web and beyond. And so web and beyond is something that we have used throughout the years, say for our podcast. Our blog, for example, is the Web and Beyond blog, and our podcast is now Web and Beyond Cast. And so when we launched the podcast, we then took the domain webandbeyondcast.com, right? It was a natural extension of our brand, and so that became the domain of choice for that purpose. Okay. And so we could have chosen webandbeyondcast.fm, which a lot of podcasts do for, since .fm is sort of the radio or audio network top-level domain of choice, we could have done that also, and we could very well have. But the .com was available, so we took the .com. You could take keyword phrases for exact match domains as well. But now you're just going to make a list of all of the ones that you have available to you that you feel like would properly represent your business as a whole. Again, the whole business, not just some part of it. Then you're going to run the rules, the revised LDH rules that I gave you, and you're going to run them through those guidelines as well to start limiting them. So you're going to say a couple of the brand name doesn't explain well enough, and maybe it's not available, and so on and so forth. And you're going to start to limit your brainstorm to the items that fit within my revised LDH rules and the guidelines I've just given you. At that point, you're going to Google each of your choices and just make sure that you're not stepping on anyone else's intellectual property. The worst thing that you can do is decide on a domain and then get to that point and then get a cease and desist letter from somebody who says, hey, by the way, this is my property. I don't know why you're using it, but please stop. And then you've gone 6 months, 2 years, 3 years into your business until that trademark owner has come across you, and then now you're going to have to step back or fight a legal challenge. Some useful things here is use the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office's TESS, which is their trademark search tool. I think it's TESS2, TESS2.uspto.gov. I think it takes you directly there, but you could just go to the uspto.gov site and find the trademark search there. If you have any questions, seek licensed legal counsel, somebody who's in your area who can help you if you really have a struggle over whether or not you should use a particular trademark or not as part of your domain. Next up, you need to search to see whether or not Google has banned this domain from someone who was a prior owner. Just like with a piece of real property, people might have done some bad things to it, and you need to make sure that you're getting good title, good ownership of the thing that you're about to register. So I tell everybody to go to site : just type in SITE : and the domain that you're looking to choose into Google. And if it comes up blank, if there's nothing showing, that's a pretty good indicator that Google has banned that website at some point in time for purpose, meaning that someone did something bad to it. If nothing comes up, your domain's banned. You should also go to bannedcheck.com, BANNED, check, CHECK.com, and you can type in the domain there, and you will see whether or not Google has banned them from Google AdSense, meaning that if for some reason they've done something wrong, not necessarily that you want to use this domain in order to put ads on your own website, but it's a pretty good indicator that someone was up to something wrong and bad, and you don't want to be associated with that. So if it's been banned by Google by nothing showing up, and it's been banned by Google AdSense, that's a pretty good indicator that somebody was up to no good, and you should probably avoid it. Next up is archive.org. So this is just in that same due diligence space. If you go to archive.org, which I'm going to go to right now for you, you can see here on archive.org, there is the Wayback Machine. And you can type into the Wayback Machine any website, domain name, and browse its history. And what the Wayback Machine will do now is it will look back in the archive, and maybe you do or don't know this, but very little on the internet is ever deleted, okay? It's all archived in some way, shape, or form, not just by the Internet Archive, but by many other indexes. And so in this case, you can see here that going back to 2002, the Internet Archive has been archiving copies of example.com and all the way up until today's date. And you can see here, if you hover over any date, you can see the exact time signatures as to when those captures were taken. And then you can click on it, and you can see what the website looked like and its content was going back in history. Now, again, you can do this for almost any website that has been captured here by the Internet Archive, for all of its history. And so this is a good tip for you, that if you, for some reason, you accidentally deleted something on your website and you knew that you've had it on your website for a couple of years, you could probably go back to the Internet Archive and find that so that you can see that. And so you can see here, this is what example.com looked like back on March 13th of 2018. And so, oh no, I'm sorry. I'm not sure when this was taken. Yeah, it says March 13th, 2018. So you can see that you can go back in history to the various captures and see. And so for due diligence of your domain, you want to see that if somebody posted something really bad back in 2005, is that something that you really want to be associated with in present day? Okay, so just important for you to keep that in mind. Next up is at this point, you should have a really short list of domains, like 2 or 3 domains that are left. If you have some large list of domains, then you need to go ahead and run it through the revised LDH rules again and the guidelines I've given you, because at some point you're going to have to take a gut check and eliminate them. Or if you do have a longer list than the very short list, then you can go to friends, family, colleagues, and give them the list and say, which one of these really feels best like it represents the business, and take a poll and see what people represent and tell you. Okay. Next up is do the domain names on your shortlist have marsupials? So what are marsupials? In the domain world, marsupials, just like the our marsupial animals in the world, like kangaroos, they have their children who are living inside them, right? They're sitting inside their pouch. So marsupials and domain names are when words are created by the string of characters that represent our domain name. So they are unintended words that crop up and could potentially be inappropriate or just not words that we want. I'll give you a couple of examples. For example, itscrap.com. Itscrap.com, of course, can be looked at as itscrap.com, or as it's, if you look at the different words differently when it's put together, you see something different, right? The same thing then with who represents. They're a talent agency on the internet, a very large talent agency, but whorepresents.com, if you just start shifting your eyes, it goes from who represents to something else. All right. And so this is an unintended consequence of the combination of these words. And just one last one for giggles. People use their base minds when they are reading these domain names, and this will impact your business. I mean, if somebody sees that, it's going to create potential memes that will be proliferated on social media, and it can really kill your brand out the gate. So you really want to pay attention to these marsupials. The other is that sometimes it represents something that might be in a foreign language. So I would really put this in front of some of your linguophiles, your friends who are linguophiles, and make sure that you don't choose something that maybe in a foreign language creates something that might be inappropriate or just completely off-brand for you. All right. Finally, is your domain available as a username on major websites? And a really great tool to use is namecheck.com. You can basically go to namecheck.com and type it in. I was going to show you, but for saving time purposes, just go to namechk.com, type in your in the second level domain, right? Just the example in example.com, and see its availability across all the various social media. And if for some reason it's been taken by a lot of them, then it's probably not a good idea to take that as your domain, because now your domain is going to be so very different from your domain. If you want to register these two tools, claim.io and Noam, are very useful. They actually will take a username and help register it across many different social media sites for you. Finally, if you determine you want a domain, you should really register it immediately, but you should never go onto a domain registrar's website and start typing in domains that you want when you're not ready to register. Okay, this is really important. So hear me out here. When you type in a domain into a domain registrar's website, you are putting an alert out there to a whole bunch of cyber squatters who will then register your domain and like domains and related domains, so that when you're ready to register, they have now already registered it, and now they will be happy to sell it to you for some greater amount of money. So a domain that would have cost you $10, $20, $30 will now cost you $6,000, $7,000, $1,000, $5,000 because they now have it. And since you've indicated that interest by going to a domain registrar and doing a search on it, it kind of alerts them to it. So what I always tell people is actually to use Whois. And so Whois is actually a service if you go to whois.com, and what you can do is you can type into whois like example.com, right? And then I've already done that search, and you can see example.com shows up here, and it shows you that the domain has been registered. It tells you who the registrar was. In this case, the IANA, right? IANA has registered it. They registered it back in 1995, right? When the domains were registered, and it tells you when it's going to expire and some other information, right? And in this case, it doesn't tell you very much because it's IANA. But you can look at this information and not trigger the bad actors, the cyber squatters, without it. And the same thing, we have this tool on W3C Web Services page. It's not the domain search here. You scroll down to the bottom of the page, and there is the whois option. So if you click on whois, then it will take you to our whois tool, so that you can then go in there and then type in the same thing. In this case, example.com, do the search, and then it will give you the data that represents the whois, and in this case, it gives you all of this fun information and so on and so forth. Okay, so just be aware that searching for domains should be done through whois and not through the domain registrar's pages. Just a couple of really quick things. I know we're running over time at the moment, so just bear with me for another minute, and I will cover just a couple of things. Pay attention to what are called dropped domains. Dropped domains are domains that are in some level of expiry. Many times those domains are not available for registration, but they can be if they go into full, if they basically fall out of expiry and now they're available. So the way in which you do that is by backordering a domain. So you can take a domain today and use that as your domain. For example, veryjane.com was veryjane.com for many years, and then they backordered the domain jane.com because that's what they originally wanted. And then eventually jane.com became available. Since they backordered, it immediately became theirs, and then they were able to use it. You might want to register your own name just for brand protection. So just keep that in mind. Private registration in the domain world gives you the ability to hide your, say if you use your home address for your business, but you don't really want to promote that on the web, you can use private registration, which will then privatize or basically not show your information on the whois where I just showed you. You might want to register common misspellings. Again, I would first talk to someone like me and get some advice about whether or not you should be registering a bunch of common misspellings if you really don't need to, but you may think about spelling common misspellings, especially if you have like a trailing S on your name, but your domain doesn't, things of that nature. Think about domains for the future. So really, if you're thinking about your brand growing beyond just what your primary service or product line is, you should really think, okay, if we really only want this domain now, well, then we should probably register the other domains for the future as well. And I talked a little about Bitly earlier, but you should also think about short URLs. Many times people don't think about registering short URLs, but it's really great for social media sharing. And so you should consider short URLs that are branded, because instead of sending bit.ly.com/6 characters, you can send your business name, like Time Magazine, they share with ti.me/ and 6 characters or whatever else they want after it. But now they control that brand. They can change the source URL behind the scenes and do a couple of other really fancy things that are really clean for representing your brand well. So with that, I'll turn it over to Tracy to close out, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Ray. I'm going to go ahead and close out, and then I've got at least one question here, but go ahead and type those in the window as we do that. Thank you all for participating today. Today's webinar was recorded, and it'll be posted on the Virginia SBDC website under live webinars and recordings. Tomorrow, you'll be receiving an email asking for feedback on this webinar. Help us to continue to improve our webinar series by completing that survey. If you'd like to complete it now, I just posted that in the chat window. And our next webinar is on August 9th, and it's Small Business Cyber Resilience, the Basics of Cybersecurity for Small Businesses. So thank you everyone for participating today. The one question that we have, Ray, is I used my business name as my domain. However, it's over 30 letters long. Is there a simple way to transition to a shorter domain name from an established one?
That's a great question, and it's one that I come across quite often. What you'll inevitably want to do is to leave the current domain the way it is and register a shorter one, and then you in essence duplicate your domain with your domain registrar. You will duplicate where both of those domains go to, but in Google Search Console and the other search consoles, so Google has one, Yahoo has one, Bing has one, in the three big major search consoles, you will then tell them that only one of those is the one that is the dominant domain. So in essence, you can leave it all the same. So if somebody goes to your long URL and goes to a page, they'll still get there. And then now if someone goes to the same exact URL, so your shorter URL, and they go to that page, they'll get to the same exact place, but Google's only going to want to index one of those. And so you then tell Google that through the Search Console. And Google Search Console can be reached by going to google.com/webmasters, ending in an S. And so go to google.com/webmasters, and then you're able to in essence, change your domain. And over time, then you can work with either a web developer or someone who's savvy to know how to do what are called 301 redirects. And then you can, if you wanted to, close down the old URL and just use that as a redirect to your main new short URL. Okay, so your long URL will then redirect to the homepage of your new shorter URL, and if anybody went to the long URL to a specific page, they would be redirected to the complementary page that's now a part of the shorter URL. Okay, so that's the long-term kind of project. But the short-term project is just go to your domain registrar and say, listen, I want to change domains. I don't want to do anything. I want them both to resolve to the same exact pages. And then you go to Google Search Console, Bing, and Yahoo, and just tell them which one is the one you want them to index on. Send them that sitemap, and that's the one they'll use.
Thanks. Right. What are your thoughts about Google domains? How does it compare to GoDaddy?
I don't have a particular opinion about them. They're both solid services, so you're not really going to have an issue with either. There have been some folks who have said that there are some limitations within Google domains, but I've not actually found those limitations to be problematic for us. So you can use either. I don't think it'll, it ends up becoming, because it's a commodity, it's a price issue. But wherever you're going to host, you should probably just register your domain with them. So for example, if you have a Google site, then registering with Google Domains, or if you have Blogspot, registering with Google Domains gives you tight integration between those. Or if you use G Suite, tightly integrating with those is easy, right? If you have a website hosted by GoDaddy, well, why wouldn't you just register your domains with GoDaddy as well? It's about ease of convenience, of managing together in the same dashboard, as well as ultimately what the price is, and what are they giving you for it? Are they giving you advice and expertise and access to people for technical support and strategy?
Great. Thank you, Ray, and thank you everyone for attending today.